Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Weighing In. I'm your host, David Mirikitani, along with my good friend, Mark Ostrander. Welcome back, brother.
How are you doing, David?
I was in Las Vegas, Nevada, got snowed in there for a day, so that was terrible. Had to spend an extra day there. I came back, it was 4 degrees, so I'm good, though. I was smart. I left the heat on in the house, so nothing's frozen.
And you had a good time, and you got to see Randy, and did you do any gambling whatsoever, David?
I can neither confirm nor deny. I just will say I saw Randy. So
Okay.
Get to business. We're brought to you through a partnership with USA Wrestling, the national governing body for the sport of wrestling in the United States, and sponsored by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike Wrestling and USA Wrestling branded wrestling gear. I did come back to a box of gear from USA Wrestling, so that was very nice.
Very
nice.
nice.
I know you got one while I was gone too. So we're recording this at 11 a.m. on Thursday, literally 4 weeks from when they say, please remove your hats. Let's get going. So we're excited, man. Like it's real now. I mean, it's been a crazy year, pandemic, all that stuff. But anytime you can see the end of the, see the finish line as a coach, as a fan, as an athlete, your energy level spikes a little bit, I think.
Let's just keep our fingers crossed that we don't have any problems from here on out, and everybody is going to be healthy, and this thing goes, and that's the most important part right now.
No doubt, for sure. So I'm just going to hit on a couple of the big upsets rather than go through all of the rankings by weight in terms of the sources, but I do want to thank our buddy Christian Thompson for putting those together again for us this week. He does a fantastic job. Couple of upsets at 125. Eric Barnett beat Patrick McKee 17-4. Rayvon Foley, this would not have been an upset at the beginning of the year, but it is now, beat Devin Schroeder 10-4. Probably the biggest upset of the week was Jake Wenzel beat Mekhi Lewis by injury default, but your son actually sent me a link because I was on vacation saying, describing the match, and he was ahead. So let's just talk about those. What do you think of 125, and what do you think about the Wenzel Mekhi Lewis match?
Oh, Wenzel and Mekhi. I guess everybody kind of does this different with their rankings. Flow does not count injury default against the wrestler, so they have Mekhi ranked number 1. Pretty sure they're the only ones that left Mekhi at number 1. He dropped down to number 2 on quite a few of them. I saw on one of them he dropped down to number 4. So it's kind of different with than they do with everybody else. So we'll see how it pans out. 125, these guys have been beating each other up all year long. And I know it's been a short year, but I mean, my goodness, you just can't find one guy besides Spencer Lee that may not take a loss this year. So he may be the only one that goes through undefeated. I mean, you look at the ACC coming up, David, in 2 weeks. Look at that finals match, Camacho again.
Camacho Latona, yeah.
Yes, I mean, would you be surprised if Camacho beat him this time?
No.
And 2 really good kids. Brody Teske went down this week for the first time in a 5-3 match against Arizona State. So there's his first loss. Yep. And but I think last year Courtney Tech majored him. So
I was at that meet. It was
a lot closer. So Teske has improved being back in Iowa. So, I mean, just a lot of funny things happening right now at 125. And I think they're going to continue to happen until the national tournament. And we may see some guys at the national tournament not ranked in the top 10 be All-Americans. So,
yeah, for sure. So I'm going to do a share screen here as we're talking. You mentioned the Courtney match, and that's a big match. You talk about guys that are undefeated, and right now the top 4 guys at 25 are undefeated: Hildebrandt, Courtney, and Latona. You and I have talked a bit about this on numerous occasions, but you want to be on the bottom half of the bracket, right? I mean, for obvious reasons. Like, you'd rather be seated 6 than 5. You'd rather be seated 7 than 5. Certainly rather be seated 7 than 8. And I think even 10 is not a bad spot to be right now. So Hildebrandt, Courtney, and Latona are all undefeated there, and that could make a few things kind of interesting on how that shakes out. Latona and Courtney have the best wins right now. Hildebrand just hasn't been able to wrestle those kind of guys. But the coaches poll, which we're going to talk about later, is going to have a huge impact on the rankings this year, more so than normal. So
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
And that's what they're going to look at when they go to the seating meeting is the coaches poll. I don't know how much stock they give to these other polls. Hopefully they would look at kind of what we do, and that's put an average on all of them, because I think that's really the best way to do it, David.
I saw somebody else put that out there that coaches shouldn't do rankings. And I can tell you this, when we started doing the rankings for track, I can tell you, I probably got calls from 8 to 10 coaches every year. Not asking like going 1 through 33, but why do you have this guy here? What about this result that seems contrary? Hey, we need to fill in the bottom guys. Nobody really has a hard time ranking the top 10. Like if you were just ranking 10 guys, rankings would take like 15 minutes, so it's ranking. When we jumped from 25 to 33, we told Track Wrestling those 8 guys are the ones who are going to take the most time. Yep. So, and by doing 25 when nobody else was, that took more time. But again, we talked about that. Those guys score points. There's only 8 guys that don't win a match at nationals. So those other guys all score at least a half a point.
Correct.
197. Well, we'll mention Max Lyon beat Malchewski from Michigan State. And then the other one at that weight, Carter Starachi beats Logan Massa in overtime. The score ends up like 6 or 7 to 1 because he gets a 4-point near fall on a dive through where he catches him. It's a 1-1, your typical 1-1. Nope. Each guy got to the guy's legs a time or two, but for the most part, kind of a 1-1 hand fight match. This changed the team rankings dramatically because it didn't bump Penn State as much as you think because he still has the loss to Indiana. But it hurt Michigan a lot, because Massa was number 2, and I think he fell like somewhere between 5 and 7, depending on the poll. So I actually woke up at 8 o'clock in the morning on Vegas time to watch that match. Did you get a chance to watch it? And what'd you think?
I did. I got to see it. I think they both gave each other a lot of respect. I don't think they opened up, especially on their feet. I think both of them can ride. I think they're both good at it. It was just a, really funny position that they got themselves in. It was kind of more of a danger because there really wasn't any control by either guy. But he was in a danger position where the officials started counting points, and it was the right call. So, and I think they're going to wrestle probably in the semis of the Big Ten. Would not surprise me, or they will meet again in the Big Ten. So it'll be fun to see what happens.
Yeah.
That weight's loaded in the Big Ten, David. Absolutely.
Yeah. We're going to talk about the Big Ten and how these allocations work in a few minutes. So Starachi's 7 here, Logan Massa's 5, but no disrespect to the guys in amateur wrestling news, but I think they missed the result because they have Starachi at 16. And that pulls his average down dramatically. He'd at least be above Fine Silver for sure. Because, only one source even has Fine Silver ranked. So if you bump Fine Silver out, and then, they could end up being, 4 or 5. Demetrius Romero is going to be in an interesting position at that way because if he can run the gauntlet and go undefeated, the next guys are all in the Big Ten. Iowa, Nebraska, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, right there. So
I could easily see him getting a 2 or 3 seed if he's the only other undefeated guy in this country. Even though he may not be quite as good as Kemmer or Labriola or Romero or Massa, he's undefeated. I could easily see the NCAA giving him the number 2 or 3 seed at the national tournament.
Well, he'll have come out of a conference that will have had Hayden Hastings and Dustin Plott in it as well. So Correct. He'll have to have beaten at least one of those guys. So, he will have had a high quality win. The bigger results this week were at 197. So to start at the top, Miles Amin goes from 84 to 97. I kind of got an inkling that might happen when we had Kellen Russell and Bella Glazov on the other pod. the thought process, I think, I didn't ask him. I try not to be nosy unless I have a reason to know. I don't ask. But, I think it's like, why would he cut to 184 when the Olympic weight is 189 and change? Why are you wrestling 5 pounds below your Olympic weight and having to make weight at least for a month straight? Now, he does get to miss the trials because he's the guy from San Marino, but just wrestle natural, and then I think the other thing is 84 is really good, and no disrespect, but there's a lot more guys at 84 that have done things and won big matches than there are at 97. So I'm interested in this. They made Schultz one. I guess, I don't know what I would have done. I thought about this and I wish I had a definitive answer. I probably would have made a mean one because I would have just said, well, guy made the Olympics. That's the trump card of everything. But let me set the table for the other things that happened at 97. Isaac Trumbull got stuck by Russell from Duke, and that really threw things off because he was undefeated. The ACC is kind of a mess at 97 in a good way. Like everybody's good and everybody's beating everybody. And then at the Cowboy Classic, Noah Adams beat AJ Ferrari in the semis, and then Buchanan beat Adams again in the finals. So we can't say it was altitude, and we can't say it was a fluke.
Correct.
So when you look at 97, what are your thoughts there?
Well, I look at 97 and I see Schultz, Amin, Warner, 1, 2, and 3. You look at the Big 12, you got people. I
see Norfleet in there too, man. Like he's undefeated.
I agree. But I'm just saying right now, when I look at the sheet at 197 for the rankings, you got 3 Big 10 guys, 1, 2, and 3. You got Norfleet, who should win his regional, will come in undefeated. Then you go into the Big 12 and you've got Buchanan, you got Sloan, you got Adams, you got Ferrari from Oklahoma State, who's, down there a little bit ways, but.
And Woodley.
And Woodley. I mean, these guys it is loaded in the Big 12. So I'm not sure how many undefeated kids are going to come out. I'm going to say 2 undefeated.
Well, the most it could be is 3, right? Because Schultz or Amin can win the Big 10, they'd be undefeated. Norfleet can win the Pac-12 and be undefeated. Buchanan or Sloan can win the Big 12 and be undefeated. Now,
Buchanan cannot be undefeated. He's already lost this year.
Who'd he lose to?
He lost to Norfleet.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, it is.
Okay,
right.
So Sloan could come out undefeated, though.
Sloan could come out undefeated.
Okay, and then Bullsack could come on for Clarion could come out undefeated.
Yeah.
So certainly not the same strength of schedule. But
Correct.
If you have Schultz or Amin undefeated, Norfleet undefeated, and say Sloan, those are probably your top 3.
Yep.
I think. Although I think if Schultz wins, I don't think they're going to make Amin the 4 seed. I'd be shocked. So, I mean, because again, it was easier to predict this when the formula, because you had RPI and you had record and you had conference champion and all that stuff's kind of gotten tossed out the window. Not saying that's a bad thing. It's just what has to happen this year because of COVID and the lack of matches. Like Missouri sent 1 starter to that Cowboy Classic because I think they're just terrified of like contact tracing, right? Like you go, somebody had it. Now all your guys are quarantined. They can't practice. Maybe they can compete. And the whole season, just because people go, well, the season doesn't count for eligibility. Well, coaches are coaching their fannies off. Kids are still training. Like it may not count for eligibility, but it counts in terms of how you're living your life. 100%.
And to be an All-American or to be a national champ, it counts because nobody's going to take that away from them. You're going to find out a lot this weekend too, David. I think Amin and Kathy wrestle each other. So
we'll get there.
We'll get into that. But I mean, there you got a 2 top 10 matchup. We're going to find out, Amin didn't look great to me. He didn't look bad. It just looks like he has to adjust to 197. And I think he will, but I thought he would look better doing it the first 2 matches. Schultz has looked good all year long. So I have no problems with Schultz being number 1 right now and Amin being number 2.
Amin looks small, right?
A
Like
little
that's
bit.
he looks like a 184 pounder, like a big 184 that's wrestling 97.
Yeah.
That's what he looked like to me, but I mean, the guy's obviously really good at wrestling. And if somebody said pick a guy to win 97 right now, I'd probably pick him because I think he's just going to get better at that weight, and we forget because in America, there's the trials 2 weeks after the nationals. And there's also the last chance the weekend in between. There has to be. He doesn't have to go through any of that.
Yep.
So I mean, he could get up to 200 pounds, 205, if it's good weight, and still have plenty of time to get back down for the Olympics.
Correct.
So, I mean, he's earned it, obviously, but he has some advantages that an American trying to qualify at that weight doesn't have. So let's talk a little bit about Penn State, Michigan. Most people, I'm sure, saw this, but it was 18-13, 6-4 in matches. Well, I'll go first. And Penn State's really good at winning duels. I mean, they're really good at winning matches, period. But they won most of the toss-ups that they needed to. Berge beat Luan, Srirachi beat Massa. They lost at 65 with Joe Lee against Cam Amin. But to me, Michigan could have won the duel. I think Michigan wins the duel if Misek wrestles. And I'm not saying Misek beats RBY. I actually don't know that would happen his first match out. I probably would have picked RBY. But I think what happens is Ragusin gets to go 25. And Ragusin, if you're going to say, well, RBY is a favorite over Misek because first match of the year, you have to say Ragusin's a favorite over Robbie Howard first match of the year. But by them doing that, it was an interesting decision because you and I were literally texting like, hey, Ragusin weighed in at 129, so he's going back down for the Big 12s. Like, we know this. By them doing that, I guess they thought maybe Medley could beat Howard, and then, that Ragusin could hold RBY to a decision. And I think they thought they could go 3-3. And they would have been better off, I think, with Ragusin at 25. And even if they get majored or teched or pinned at 33, which I don't think happens, pinned, that they end up winning the duel.
Oh, I agree 100%. I think they did expect to win 125. And why wouldn't you? You got a senior wrestling who's the only guy that didn't get majored by Spencer Lee last year. So he's hard to score on, obviously. This Penn State, Cal is just a hell of a coach. I mean, he just knows what he's doing and does it really, really well. And it's hard to outcoach him. And I think Michigan tried to outcoach him by moving their lineup where they thought they could win. And it's hard to do. Penn State's just solid.
Yeah, I think Michigan's lineup gets better, though, at the Big Tens, right? Because, like, Ragusin's at 25, Misek's at 33. Will Lewan had a tough match with Amin, and that was after he had a really tough match with Cleary, which was actually based on the draw, was the last match of the duel, and he needed win that match to win that duel, come back 2 days later. So, good for Michigan and Penn State for squeezing that duel in too, by the way. I mean, I think that's kind of the big thing we should be thanking them for, for getting that duel in for those of us as fans. Like it was great to watch. So, but I mean, it was an interesting duel. I think it could go, a couple of matches could go differently, right? Like Joe Lee could beat Amin. Will Lewan could beat Brady Berge. Certainly Massa could beat Starachi, but it just goes, those are coin flips. And I have this saying, I'm sure somebody came up with it before me, but in tournaments, your best guys decide who wins. And in dual meets, your worst guys decide who wins. And it's really true, like the high school level. Like if you have a guy who's not very good, but he can avoid getting teched or pinned, because your best guy is only worth 6 points. We're in a tournament, like at the Nationals, your best guy is worth 28 points. So I mean, it's a big
difference. Yep.
Gigantic difference, right?
Oh.
So let's talk about the coaches poll. So this came out couple things for people to understand. I also put the allocations on here. So you'll see a couple of big differences. If you haven't wrestled, the coaches didn't rank you. So like at 133, for example, this came out before Dayton Fix wrestled. This came out, Stevan Misick still hasn't wrestled.
Yep.
So if you apply the team scores here, it gets even more skewed, where like Iowa's at 145.5, Penn State's at 67, Virginia Tech's at 65.5, and down the line. But the coaches poll is going to probably be the biggest single deciding factor of non-on the mat stuff, basically besides the conference tournaments, because of COVID, just because of how this is set up this year. It's so different. So this is important. And I don't think they'll do another coaches poll. Well, I think they could do another one after this weekend, but it doesn't matter because there's only about 14 duels this weekend. The big coaches poll is going to be after the conference tournaments, and that's going to be gigantically important. And, you and I coached in junior college where, I'm not saying the conference tournament didn't matter, but our tournament was run by a formula, like most people's state tournament, where it's a random plug-in, and like we were in the same conference. So if you beat me in the conference final, the only thing I knew was I'm separated from you. But I don't know if you're the conference winner. When I was coaching, there were 6 conferences, so you can have 2 on your side along with yourself, but you don't know if that's going to be the Nassau region or the Clackamas region or the Northeast Oklahoma region or whatever. You don't know, and it's a formula and it rotates through every way, just like most people are used to that have ever been to a state tournament. Here, when you're trying to seed a tournament where most of these guys don't wrestle each other and there's not a lot of crossover results, like a school like Arizona State is literally gluing a lot of results together because they've been going all over the place. Yeah. They wrestled UNI, they wrestled Iowa State, they wrestled Wyoming, they wrestled, a bunch of different schools. So they have to, because their conference isn't deep, but it really helps. But it's going to be a really hard year to seed. I think you're going to have a lot of unhappy people, because I think this year more than ever is going to be, I could see it multiple different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I could too. And a lot of it depends on what weights. I mean, I keep falling over to the allocations, and I know we're not going to talk about that this minute, but, you look back and forth and you're trying to pick out guys, and, for example, 125, they got 7 qualifiers plus the champion, so 8 basic qualifiers. If you look down there, David, you have 1.
Let's go through this. So you're jumping over to allocations, okay?
Yeah, let's talk just this one weight so people understand what's going on.
Yeah, so let's give people an example. So this chart over here to the right, it's the conference and then each weight. So what they did was a 5-year average, okay? But I'm going to click over to Andrew Spey from Flow Wrestling. He did a big piece on this, and I just clicked on this one thing. The MAC gets all the EWA schools. This is what the differences he would make. The MAC gets the EWL schools. The Ivies do not count for EIWA because they're not wrestling this year. Let's talk about that for a minute. So Princeton and Cornell have qualified a ton of guys over the last 5 years. The EIWA got those as part of their allocations, but those specific schools are not wrestling this year. Eastern Michigan, Old Dominion, they no longer have programs. So he would have deducted those from the MAC. Boise State obviously doesn't have a program, would have been deducted from the Pac-12. Franklin and Marshall, same thing for the EIWA. UNI, this is really smart, would have been split, and SIU, because they moved conferences. So the years that UNI were in the Big 12 or in the MAC, Big 12 first, or now when they were in the MAC, it would have qualified for the MAC, and now the Big 12. So let's go through this. I think you and I tried to talk about this in an intelligent way before we went on the air. So we're just going to talk about here the Big 12 at 125, Big 10, at 125. Yep. They have 7 allocations, plus they get a conference champion. So they're going to get 8 kids through. Yep. So We understand there will be upsets, but we're just walking through this. Spencer Lee would be number 1. Liam Cronin would be number 2. DiAugustino would be number 3. McKee would be 4. Schroeder 5. Ragusin 6. Heinzelman 7. Rayvon Foley 8. There's your 8.
There's your 8.
Now, a couple things.
Now, David, we're down to the 14th ranked kid in the country.
This is according to the coaches.
True.
Who probably feel like they have it as good as anybody.
Yep.
Now, let's just real quick, we'll go over to the composite rankings and see how similar that is, okay?
Okay. It's kind of neat being able to look at composite compared to the coaches, compared to the allocations.
So Iowa is 1, Northwestern is 2, Nebraska is 3, Ohio State is 4, Michigan is 5, Wisconsin is 6, Minnesota is 7, Michigan State is 8. So again, top 14, okay?
Yep.
So we'll just go back to the coaches' rankings. So now the other schools that are in here, you got Cardani at 16, Barnett at 19, Brock Hudkins at 20, and Aguilar at 29. Those 4 guys are either going to have to upset somebody or get a wild card. That doesn't include Robbie Howard because he hadn't wrestled at this point.
No.
So I think what's going to happen is this. I think there's going to be a lot of outrage by sort of your mid-major schools. They're going to be like, how did Nick Aguilar get in, who at one point was 0-4 this year? How is he going to get in over my guy who's like 8-1? You know, and that's a really tough call, right? Like if you're 0-4, but you lost to, and I'm just picking the best guys you could have lost to, Spencer Lee, Liam Cronin, DiAugustino, and McKee, kind of hard to hold that against him, right?
Yep.
Especially this way, it's probably the perfect example. Like the Maryland guy who's not in here at 125, who the hell is he supposed to beat? The entire conference is ranked.
Well, he gets a guy that's 0-4 this weekend.
Okay, but you see what I'm
from Rutgers.
You see my point, right?
Yep.
I mean, I know you're being literal, but if we have 8 in the top 14 of 4 more guys on the board, that's 12. The 2 guys left are Robbie Howard and the Maryland kid.
Yep. And Robbie Howard proved that he can wrestle with the big boys in the Big Ten this past weekend. So you got to put him up there that he's got a shot at qualifying for the Nationals.
Oh, 100%. But then he's going to steal a spot.
Another spot.
Which then is going to hurt the small mid-major conferences even more. Like, let's say, again, Rayvon Foley is 8th here. Let's say that in the match to get into 8th, Robbie Howard beats Rayvon Foley, and then Rayvon Foley's 9th. He's going to nationals, man. That guy's going to nationals. You know, Cardani is probably going to nationals. So, I mean, this is, for people, and a lot of wrestling people don't follow basketball, but if you follow basketball, that's the whole thing. Like when these guys, if you are a small school, you do not want some team to run through the ACC that was like this year, Kentucky has a losing record. You do not want them to win the SEC and get in because that takes one of your slots away that you would have gotten in.
Agreed. Here's the point that I was trying to get to earlier.
Okay.
You're gonna have upsets during the conference tournaments. We have them every year. We have guys that we thought would be ranked in the top 8 or seated in the top 8 at the national tournament, and they didn't even place in their conference tournament, and they're sitting there hoping to get a wild card. This year, if you do it by trying to get the best kids, I guess, you'd say that the Big Ten, they get 8 qualifiers. There's another 5 kids that we'd like to see there at the national tournament, they're saying. So out of the 7, the Big Ten gets 5 of them. I'm not sure that's fair to the Big 12. I think the interesting one, that's where we're going to have the problems. You know, these.
Well, I think what you'd have to do, and we have, 15 minutes left on this podcast, is go through and go, okay, let's check these other guys off, right? Like, okay, Drew Hildebrandt goes to the MAC. He's one of their 4. Courtney's at the Pac-12. He's one of their 2. and if people think I'm saying it wrong because they each get one more. The MAC has 3+1, the Pac-12 has 1+1. And you start going down that thing. Like there, I see 3 from the Big 10, right? Or Big 12 rather, right here. Lamont, Teskey, and Mastro. So there's still 2 left there. I think you'd look and see who on this is really, who's going to get gypped, right? And if nobody's getting gypped, then you kind of go, okay, I guess that makes sense. So it might sound wrong, and it's actually right. I mean, it's going to be tough to see.
And the difference is, you know, every other year, David, if you had a kid ranked in the coaches poll in the top 25, he automatically got a qualifier for the national tournament. So if they did that this year, you know, the Big 10 would possibly have 10 or 11 qualifiers at 125. And that's where it would start.
They would have 10 or 11 slots.
Slots, yeah. So qualifiers.
Yeah.
Guys that automatically qualify. Doesn't mean that it's one of those 10 guys that's ranked there, but I mean, and somebody obviously that's 13 or 14 in the Big 10 could win a couple matches and take a spot away from a guy that, you know, was slotted to go. But it's just, this is going to be really difficult, I think, for the conference tournaments, seeding at the national tournament, especially when the upsets start happening in the conference tournament. And it's going to happen. They happen every year.
I don't know if this explanation is going to make this more complicated or simpler to understand, but this is like the Olympic trials in 2016, where Tony Ramos qualified the United States for the Olympics, but then Daniel Dennis won the actual spot on the team. So this can happen. Like, again, in a normal year, you'd say, okay, I mean, this would be impossible, but to use the, you know, the Big 10 as an example, these are the only 8 guys that qualified the spot, the fully on up, those 14. Okay. So there were 8 slots, 7+1. So then if Cardani gets in the top 8, which wouldn't shock anybody, he stole person X's spot. Now that person goes probably at the very top of the wild card list. So, I mean, that for people to understand, that's kind of how it works.
Yep. You know, perfect example last year, Caleb Young placed 9th. They had 7 automatic qualifiers for the Big 10. He was 9th. He was off the board, and he ended up getting a wild card, and he was seeded in the top 8. So at the national tournament. So, I mean, it's there for people that had, you know, performed all year long. That's what it's for. So, but I'd hate to see one conference take, you know, 2/3 of every qualifying at-large bids at the end. And I would hate to see that. And I hope it doesn't happen.
Well, this is what we talked about, though. When the Big 10 decided they're only going to wrestle other Big 10 schools, it was a really smart move by them because they don't have to prove anything. They don't have to have outside results. Those outside results probably only hurt them. So by, you know, the assumption is the Big 10 is the best conference in the country because year after year, depth-wise and champion-wise, it has been, you know, for a long time. When you look at, you know, Penn State, Iowa, and Ohio State, that's a lot of team titles in a row.
Yep.
So I want to go back real quick just to make sure people don't think we forgot this. We now have 4 guys that have 4 new number 1s this year. Okay. I mean, at 197, it's different. At 165, it's different. At 184, it's different. And I'm trying to think of the other one, but maybe it's just, I don't know why I'm saying, maybe it's 3.
Yes.
I think it is just 3. So the other.
Well, Dayton was, you know, I guess some of them didn't have him ranked, but I mean, because he hadn't wrestled yet, but most polls had him number 1.
3 number 1s. And then the other match we didn't mention was Mahler beat Boo in overtime at the Cowboy Classic. We didn't mention it because it's not an upset, but it was 3 beating 4, you know, depending on the polls and everything. But a great matchup, and that was the 1 starter Missouri sent. So, you know, that's a big result because, again, now those guys are handcuffed. So, you know, I mean, Mahler's going to be above Boo at the national tournament unless something goofy happens, you know, so.
Yep.
So a couple things left. I think maybe I'm just going to mention this. I think Arizona State's in a really kind of low-key position to do really well at nationals. They're going to get seated really high at 125. They're going to get seated really high at 197. I mean, I'm assuming they win their conference tournament, but that's all they have left. And they're going to be seated high at heavyweight because Schultz had a good weekend in Iowa.
Yep. Beat 2 ranked guys ahead of him. So
yeah, and he's up to number 5. So those are guys that are going to be seated really high. Michael McGee's kind of in that round of 12 conversation. Ja'Cory Teemer's a high ceiling guy. Anthony Valencia is ranked in the top 6. Mark Munoz's son, Trey, is wrestling really well. They got 7 kids on a good day that could medal, and they could put 2 in the finals. I mean, if Courtney's on the bottom half of the bracket, he's probably even money. You know, he's as good as anybody down there. And Norfleet, I think, is as good as anybody, period, at that weight. I mean, it's just an up for grabs weight. So, you know, I remember saying to you, we talk almost every day or every other day, and I'm like, maybe Noah Adams is just the best guy, and I'm got my head in the sand, and then he gets beat by Buchanan like 36 hours after I have that call with you. So yeah. I think I was right in the beginning that weight's really topsy-turvy. Amin obviously adds depth to it. The other thing is Virginia Tech benefited at 84. Even though Mackay drops in the rankings, Bolin moves to number 1, which is probably good for Hidley because it means that they're a lot less likely to be on the same side now. They're probably going to be top and bottom. So that's, that's an interesting thing. Let's talk a little bit about the duels coming up this weekend. Michigan State, big matchups at 125 and 197. You got Foley against Ragusan, I hope. Maybe Ragusan can't get down that quick. We'll see. 197, Cam Caffey, Amin. That's an exciting match to look at. I'm going to skip Penn State, Ohio State, because we're going to come back to that. Northwestern, Minnesota. You pointed this out, Deacon and Brayton Lee.
Yep.
2 top 7 guys. Deacon's number 1 and finally came out and wrestled last week. Nebraska, Illinois. Not a ton of marquee matchups, but a really good duel that could easily go 5-5. Our former compatriot Andy Hamilton posted a tweet that had 9 guys in the Big Ten that had all beaten or lost to each other. Nobody was undefeated and nobody was winless. And how do you rank that? And that's a very hard thing. We probably would have spent an hour on 184 alone just with those guys. And that's where an outside match would have helped, right? This guy lost to the guy from Princeton or lost to the guy from Cornell and this other guy beat him, those kind of things. So,
yes.
Let's talk about Penn State against Ohio State. So we'll go kind of on paper and see how that just adds up. At 25, Ohio State's favored. At 33, Penn State's favored big. 41, Penn State's favored. 49, Ohio State's favored. 57, Penn State's probably a slight favorite, right? Lee over Cleary.
Yes.
65 is going to be Ethan Smith and Joe Lee. It's kind of a toss-up match, right?
I think you have to give it to Ethan Smith. Ethan Smith beat Michigan.
That's fair. So it's 3-3. 74, you got Starachi and Romero. I think Ohio State's favored there, but I mean, it's going to be a great match.
Yep.
Okay. 84, Aaron Brooks is going to be favored. 97, I think Beard's favored, right? Over Singletary?
Or Hoffman.
Hoffman. Who knows, right?
I would say that could decide the duel. That one match could decide the duel.
And then Ohio State's favored at heavyweight by a little bit. Orndorff over Neville's.
Yep.
So if you give Penn State the toss-up match, it's 5-5. Then you look at bonus. RBY shirt seems like he's a guy that could bonus there. Nick Lee's a guy that can bonus every match. Sammy Sasso's a guy that's bonusing in a lot of matches. Yep. I think Nick Lee against Echemendia if they wrestle is kind of a fascinating match, right? Because Echemendia got pinned by Jaden Ironman, and he may be out because he rolled his ankle in that match. So it might be D'Amelio. But either way, Nick Lee didn't get a major against Michigan, which it sure looked like he would. He got a takedown 4 seconds into the match. Spent a lot of time on top, but ended up falling a takedown short of the major. But this is a really interesting duel, because like Iowa I don't think Iowa's going to wrestle. I think this is it. Like they're not going to wrestle Penn State this year.
It doesn't look like it. They have a chance of wrestling Sunday against Wisconsin. They are back in the room on a limited basis, whatever that stands for, I guess. But yeah, I really believe that the 197 could decide the duel, and there are some toss-up matches. I think heavyweight's a toss-up match. Penn State, Neville's has been really good this year. Obviously, he lost to Michigan, but I still think Michigan might win the national title at heavyweight. So, I mean, that's how good he is. He looks as good as Stevens does from Minnesota to me.
Stevenson.
I know they've wrestled.
Stevenson.
Yeah,
Stevenson.
Yeah. But, I mean, I think it's a toss-up when them two wrestle. I really do. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a bunch of matches that could, like Heinzelman, if Heinzelman, Robbie Howard isn't like a walkover. I think 57s. There's a bunch of matches there that you go either side could win pretty easily. I feel like Penn State's got 3 favorites. They're favored pretty heavily at 33, 41, and 84. I feel like they're and then Ohio State's favored pretty, strongly at 49.
Yes.
So
but that's really the only weight that they're favored heavily at.
Right.
Penn State is favored heavily at 3 weights. So I'm going to lean a little bit more toward Penn State because of that.
Yeah. Because they got to win. They got to win 2 of the 6 toss-up matches.
Yep.
Because if they do, they'll probably win on bonus.
Agreed.
Yeah. Although Sammy Sasso could pin somebody, that dude cradles a lot of people.
But I'm still counting him as a heavy favorite. So
no, right. But like if those 2 guys get 3 majors, and get a pin, if it's tied, they win the criteria.
Yeah.
Because it's most 6-point decisions. We got about 3 minutes left. Probably the biggest news that maybe nobody's talking about is Iowa has confirmed they're interested in adding women's wrestling. That's gigantic. The growth of the sport, totally significant. We'll probably talk about it more next week because we just don't have, we started talking about this other stuff and ran out of time. We certainly want to make sure people are aware of this. And that's a huge domino. If we can, we as a sport, that could happen because, now then the other schools that are sort of hotbeds of wrestling, maybe now the Pennsylvania schools, maybe the Oklahoma schools will start adding that. And it just gives everybody more opportunities to wrestle, makes wrestling more viable. Certainly going to have a conversation about freestyle versus folk style and all that other stuff, but women wrestling period's a great thing.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be cool to see 14 Big Ten women's teams?
Oh my God. Yeah. Amazing.
I could see it happen if Iowa can get the ball rolling, get it started. I think the other Big Ten schools are going to fall in line. And then I think the Big 12 is going to come on board. And there's no reason it shouldn't happen. Women's wrestling has exploded. They're good athletes, David. They are. They're really good athletes.
Well, they're the only team of the 3 that have qualified all the weights for the Olympics. So there's that alone is something. So we just want to remind everybody again how grateful we are to be able to do this podcast every week. And it's made possible through a partnership of USA Wrestling, the national governing body of wrestling in the United States, and Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all your Nike and USA Wrestling branded wrestling gear. For Mark Ostrander, I'm David Mirikitani. Thank you guys so much, as always, for watching and listening and your support. Have a great day.